Hello and welcome to Day 9 of Women in Antiquity. Today we're going to be taking a closer look at women's private life in classical Greece, especially Athens. So before we do that, I want to talk a little bit more about the position paper. By the way, what we're looking at is one of the more famous frescoes from the city of Pompeii, which is, as you may know, the preserved city of Neapolitan Italy that was destroyed and simultaneously preserved by the volcanic eruption of Vesuvius in 79 CE. This shows a relatively well-to-do Roman Pompeian woman with a set of wax tablets and a stylus. As I may have mentioned, wax tablets were an ideal form for the accumulation of temporary information, since wax could be wiped and reused as necessary. There's also some interesting elements to the dress and ornaments, which mark her out as someone who is both possessed of wealth and interested in style, there is a great deal of writing about the styles and fashions of the early Principate of the Romans. But to the position paper. So one of the things that we want to think about is the way in which the structure of the paper is approached, and the kinds of things that you want to do in undertaking the paper. And it's very important to make sure that you have a sense of what it is that you're trying to demonstrate with this paper. And that means that you want to make sure that you have a strong thesis statement. The thesis statement is the backbone of your paper. So you want to start out with an introduction that leads up to a thesis statement that is making a strong assertion that someone could disagree with. And so, in so doing, the important thing here is that you're writing about something that you have something to say about, that you have some stand on. And so you can, take some liberties with the topic question. This is one of the reasons why, I'm asking for a proposal, and that you think about these things in advance. You can shift the subject matter of the topic questions that have been put to you towards something that you're interested in writing in. But the most important thing is that you are making an argument, that you start out with a statement that you are going to convince the reader of. A statement that could be debated, could be argued, to which there is another side that is also reasonable. And then that you then spend the rest of the paper presenting evidence and interpretation that supports your thesis. The approach to this is one approach to this, certainly not the absolute sole path, but one approach to this is in the elephant pamphlet, the Writing a Position Paper booklet that is part of the handouts for the course. And in particular, some of the things I'm about to say are, in this pamphlet. So I advise you to take a look at this, and not, right before you hand in the paper, but as a means of cogitating on how you are going to approach and shape the argument that you're making. So you want to think about the structure of the paper. You want to think about the way that you are setting it up in the introduction, giving a sense of what the problem is and what the possible answers are, what the possible antagonistic responses are to the problem, and then stating your thesis. And your thesis should not only be strong, you should try to make it specific. So in this case, the example that I give in the pamphlet about Hannibal's use of elephants, that thesis I try to make as specific as I can, so that what I have to do in the paper is carefully circumscribed. And so you have a very strong chance of coming out with the paper having demonstrated the elements of your thesis. And then, the rest of your paper is giving a set of reasons why your thesis is true. And generally speaking, the approach in academia is that, there's something called the rule of three. That if you provide three reasons why something is true, three reasons why an argument is reasonable and supportable, then you've made a strong case. You have, in architectural terms, you have provided three pillars that are firmly supporting the argument that you're making. In each case, if you think about each reason, take a look at, and you can think of this as, so your introduction is like one paragraph, and then your first reason is a page, second reason is another page, third reason is another page. Write your conclusion, and you're set. The thesis provides your backbone, and it also provides the physical shape of your paper. So within each reason, what you do is the strongest approach in my experience is within each reason make a sub-assertion, make a partial argument. You start at your this first section after the introduction with with an assertion. So in the case of the Hannibal's use of elephants, my thesis outlines three reasons why use of elephants was a bad idea, and so I talk about the first reason, and so I make an assertion associated with that reason, and then in the paper I would describe the evidence that relates to that, and then discuss it. And so each of these sections, can have a relatively straightforward and internal structure within it. Start with an assertion. Describe the evidence that you have. It can be direct quotes, it can be, indirect quotes, it can be a summary of, different things from different sources or whatever. But then talk about what this evidence shows. You can make it physically represent that structure. You have a paragraph that describes the evidence, and then you have another paragraph that talks about what this evidence shows, how it relates to your thesis, how it shows that your thesis is strong and supported, how this evidence illustrates this aspect of your thesis, illustrates your first assertion, which is part of your demonstration of your thesis. And then the second one. So again, make an assertion, describe your evidence, discuss and analyze. Make an assertion, describe your evidence, discuss and analyze, and then bring it home. Tie together the three sets of analysis and discussion that you have made, and show how collectively, altogether, this is demonstration of your thesis overall. One of the things that you also want to make sure that you do at some point, and this can be, after you've made your case, is to think about what someone would say to disagree with you. Because, if your reader knows anything about this subject, your reader is going to be thinking of the most prominent reason why you're wrong. So if you're writing a paper about how Napoleon was nude all the time, and you have all kinds of evidence to talk about his nude behavior and so forth, your reader is still going to be thinking of all those pictures where he has his hand in his waistcoat. And so you need to address that, because otherwise your reader is going to get to the end of the paper, and however strong your argument is, however impeccable your logic, your reader is still going to be thinking, but what about the hand in the waistcoat? And so if you have a paragraph that talks about, okay, and so the thing with the hand in the waistcoat, that's actually a distortion. And, the painters were bribed to, paint Napoleon with clothes. Whatever it is, you need to provide evidence that supports your thesis positively, and also provide evidence and analysis that debunks the most prominent argument against you. That's the ultimate way to make an effective and strong presentation of the case. So, as you are writing your paper, think about what it is that you have to convince your reader of. That's positive support of your thesis through evidence and analysis of that evidence, and to dismiss any strong arguments against what you're saying that would come to mind for any well-informed reader. So research. So you're going to want to support what it is that you're going to be writing in this paper with evidence. It's for this paper, it's not enough merely to make an analytical argument. This is not merely an essay to flesh out your opinion. This is a history article. And that means that you need to act like an historian. You need to make an assertion that is supported by evidence. And that is how history works. History is not description of the facts, because we have no facts. Remember that all of the evidence that we have at hand, as I discussed in my first lecture, all of the evidence that we have is distorted and removed from the first event. Our primary sources are all, without exception, contaminated by bias, intentional bias and unintentional bias, point of view, and problems with selection and translation. Our secondary sources are, by definition, a scholar's interpretation of the primary sources. Therefore adding an extra layer of interpretation away from the original event. We have primary and secondary sources. We have no zeroth sources. We have no truth. Even if you, got in a DeLorean and went back to the past and went to actually see, the Battle of Thermopylae, or the seduction of Cleopatra. And I'll leave it to you whether you're imagining the seduction of Cleopatra by Caesar or seduction by Cleopatra of Caesar. Even if you, no matter what, even if you went back in time, you'd still have the fundamental problem of point of view, of unintentional bias, the way that your mind is set up, the furniture of your mind, and so forth and so on. There is no truth in history. History is subjective interpretation, and so the process of history is to interpret the past using the evidence that you have, and convince other historians that this is the thing that we should all collectively believe. And ancient history, you would think that ancient history, what happened in ancient history it was settled already, 2,000 years ago. But the fact is that ancient history is a vibrant and fertile, ground for a powerful and impassioned debate. And a good deal of our understanding of ancient history has been transformed radically over the last 100 years, over the last 50 years, over the last 25 years. In particular, the understanding of women in antiquity was transformed by Pomeroy's book Goddesses, and by her other work, including Spartan Women, and has undergone a number of seismic shocks and disagreements since then. So my point is that what you are doing here is the work of a historical scholar. You're making an assertion that you want to convince the academic community, and you're basing that in evidence. So the evidence that you have at hand, you have the articles, which the secondary sources that are provided for this course, including the Pomeroy book and also all the journal articles that we've provided. You have primary sources that have also been provided for the course, some of which may be relevant. I would suggest that in most of these cases, the primary sources that I provided, the readings from classical sources, are short excerpts, and you're going to want to look at the actual original source material. In order to see what's going on in context a little bit more fully. So, for example, if you're looking at the Bacchae, today's reading of Euripides as the Bacchae is only bits and pieces of the play, and you'll want to, if this touches on what you're writing about, you'll want to go and look at the whole play itself and understand fully what's going on, understand what fully is being attributed to these characters and the interactions between them. So the material provided for the course may not be sufficient for you. You need to have at least 3 sources, and they need to be ideally a mix of primary and secondary sources. So what you might want to do is to go a little bit, further out into exploring what is available for you in terms of evidence, primary and secondary sources. So there are works that are referred to in the Pomeroy itself, and you'll be able to notice ones that are relevant to you both as notes to particular sections in the book, and you can see the full bibliography in the back. The relevant primary sources, if you want to look for the full versions, you can usually find them via the ancient text link on my website in English, or of course in the original Greek or Latin, if that is useful to you. You may also want to take some time to see what's available in the library. There may be books on the subject that are absolutely ideal for what you're looking for. The interesting thing about the library is, first of all, of course, you can do a catalog search online. You can check and see what's available in the Lehman Library, or what's available in CUNY. If something is in the City College Library that you need, you can have it sent to you. What's really the most useful thing that I found in terms of research is you do a card catalog search. You do a subject search or keyword search on a particular term or set of terms that are related to your topic, and then what you find from the results is that they tend to cluster around certain call numbers. And so what normally happens for me is that I go and find those call numbers, those groupings of call numbers, and look at the shelf. And what is actually on the shelf, chances are, and this has happened to me a number of times, the book that I actually needed was next to the book that came up on the card catalog search. And you can browse the shelf and come up with things that didn't necessarily pop up in the keyword search itself, and it's very easy to eliminate things that are on the shelf in that general subject area by checking the table of contents and checking the index to see whether the topic that you're interested in, and key names or words or whatever that are associated with it are mentioned in the book. If not, you can set it aside. Another option, if there's a book that you obviously really need that is not in the CUNY system, it is normally available through interlibrary loan. The compressed time scale for this course means that that's probably not going to be an option for you, but you can go and find books that are not in the CUNY system by going to the New York Public Library. The main research library at Fifth and 42nd in Manhattan has a huge repository of books that are not available elsewhere. You can't check them out, but you can call them up. You can sit with them and take notes and make photocopies. So if you're really stumped for what supports for supporting evidence, but you know that there's books out there that will provide for you. And once again, you can search the public library online before you make the trip out there. It might be worth actually making that trip if there are books there that you need that will provide you the evidence that will demonstrate your thesis. Another resource for getting information about books is WorldCat. This is particularly helpful in finding the details about a book, publication details, years of printing and so forth, and different versions and editions, and so forth. Once you have books or articles that are related to your subject, they can lead you to other books that are key to the subject that you are exploring. And so you want to take a look at the footnotes in the books that you already have in order to see if they are pointing you towards something that you need. So, for example, if you're writing about Spartan women and you have in front of you Pomeroy's Goddesses, Whores, Wives, and Slaves, the section on Spartan women will refer to the books on the subject, including the very famous book by Sarah Pomeroy called Spartan Women. And then you'll find out, okay, there's this book called Spartan Women. That's the book that I need to go and find. And then you can proceed to track it down. It might be particularly useful to search for other journal articles that are more tightly focused on what it is that you want to say. Books tend to be about general subjects, and journal articles tend to be about very specific questions. And so you can use the database search functions on the Lehman Library website to track down journal articles that are focused on particular problems and questions related to the topic that you have at hand. And JSTOR and these other databases have PDF versions of the articles available in their entirety. So generally speaking, if these databases have the journal that you need, you don't have to actually go and track down a physical copy. So you'll have versions like the articles that I provided for the course. And of course, you can talk to me if you're looking for advice on how to pursue the accumulation of additional evidence. But so I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. That said, initiative on your part in tracking down the evidence that you need to make a convincing case is part of the expectations of this particular assignment. The third thing related to the position paper is footnotes and bibliography, citations. This is absolutely vital. As you see from the requirements for all papers handout, not only is this absolutely required, but I take off very potent deductions for some or all footnotes being missing, lack of bibliography, lack of citations. This is an absolutely vital mechanism to demonstrate the difference between information that you're getting from other sources and your own discussion and interpretation. Because what happens if you don't have citations for something is that the upshot is you're claiming it as your own. You're claiming it as your own assertions, your own discussions, your own information. And that is, intellectual dishonesty. That is plagiarism. And so, not to have proper citations is a very serious academic violation. So, you need to make sure that you have a bibliography that lists all of the works that you are using as sources for this paper. Examples of the structure for the bibliography are in the back of the elephant pamphlet. And then each piece of information that you present as evidence in your paper that comes from another source, that comes from anywhere outside of your own head, has to be footnoted, has to be cited. And so, you do your footnote by pointing to one of the items in your bibliography and adding information about the location, adding a page number. And so you see in this example, you have a book by Smith listed in your bibliography, and then you present information that comes from that source in your text, and that merits a footnote that points to the Smith book and says this information can be found on page 34 of the Smith book. If you don't do that, then you're being academically dishonest. And it's vitally important that you do this, even if it's not a direct quote. This is the place where students get messed up the most, is that they assume that only a direct quote has to be cited. That's not true. Even if you're paraphrasing, even if it's just describing an idea that comes from a particular source, you still need to say this idea came from this particular source. You still need to have a footnote. Anything that's not from your own head, it doesn't matter whether there's quote marks around it or not, still has to have a footnote. And so, points to remember, what I just said: cite information that's from outside your own head. Direct quote, paraphrases, information, and even ideas. Everything in the paper should support your thesis statement. And in other words, don't put in information that is not necessary to support your thesis statement. If you are writing about to take to today's example, what happens in the Bacchae by Euripides, you don't need to provide a history of Athenian tragedy. You don't need to provide the backstory. You don't need to provide a plot summary other than to indicate the sections of the story that are relevant to what you're saying. If there are moments in the Bacchae that are supporting what it is that you are trying to demonstrate with your paper, don't spend a page describing the plot of the Bacchae. Talk about the moments in the play that support your thesis. Don't narrate the history. Make your argument. Which is what I just said. Don't narrate the history. Make your argument. I love it when bullet points anticipate what it is that I've already said. Or actually, it was me anticipating the bullet point, right? Check out the paper requirements in the handout, and that means look at the requirements for the position paper, and make sure to look at the requirements for all papers, and take a look at both pages, because the second page of that handout talks about how I grade, and that's useful information. What it is that I'm looking for in your paper is something that you want to think about. So take a look at all of these. In terms of citing ancient sources, okay, so the way that ancient sources are cited is there is a common way to do this that's different from if you were citing, say, Pomeroy's Goddesses' Whores, or any modern book. Any modern book or journal article, you do it in the format that is described in the elephant pamphlets that we saw on the other slide, where you give author name, title, publishing information, and date of publication. And for a journal article, you give author, article, title, journal name, volume, year, page numbers. For ancient sources, here's the thing. Everybody that is remotely connected with ancient history has their own favorite version of, the Iliad, or, their own favorite version of Herodotus's history. And so, these are going to be different editions, different page numbers. They're going to be, different translations. And so what we do with ancient sources in order to have a common frame of reference is you just refer to the author, the title of the work, and a standardized set of chapters and sections. And so, if you have the Iliad and the Odyssey, for example, you would just give that as Homer, Iliad, book 2, and the section number if it's available in your translation. And so it could be, or a line number if it's a verse translation. And so, you might have Homer, Iliad, 256 to 374. And so that would be, book 2, and then giving the section of line numbers that refers to. And that way, anybody with any edition of Homer is going to be able to track down the place that this occurs. Likewise, Herodotus' histories. Herodotus, we only have one surviving work, so all you need to give is Herodotus, and then, book 7, section 34. So forth and so on. And so there are some examples of this that you might have noticed in some of the works that we've been looking at along the way. But if you have any questions about this, you can see the way the abbreviations that are used on the Ancient Sources link on my website. If you have any questions about how to cite a particular ancient source, just ask me. I'm aware that, of course, if you're looking at electronic versions of things like individual plays, so if you were citing, for example, the online version of the Bacchae, it might not have line numbers, and ancient plays are not divided by acts the way that Shakespearean and post-Shakespearean plays are divided. So, you may, in some cases, only be able to give, something like Euripides' Bacchae. But ideally, if you can give a section number or a line number, that is the thing that you should do. And then in your bibliography, you need to give information about the translation that you used. And so, if you're using Homer's Iliad, in the text, your footnote is just going to say, Homer Iliad, 2, or Homer Iliad 2.365 to 473. And then in your bibliography, you need to give the translation, the edition that you used. And so your bibliography will give Homer Iliad translated by X, published by, New York Bantam Press, 1972 or whatever. You still need to give the publication information in your bibliography for the translation that you used. If you're using an online source for anything, whether it's an ancient source or a modern source other than a JSTOR article, if you're giving a journal article, all you need to give is the journal name, volume number, year, page number. But anything else that comes from online, you need to give the URL. And this is a good place to remind you that tertiary sources are not allowed. Most of what's on the internet is tertiary source and is not allowed. Encyclopedias, Textbooks, not allowed. And so, if you do something like citing from Wikipedia, or citing from some guy's website about Sophocles, chances are that's going to be, not allowed, and it's going to cost you in your grade. If you have any questions about whether something is a valid source to use, ask me about it. But do not use tertiary sources under any circumstances, because you will get marked down for that, because you're doing bad history. You're using poor sources for your research. Okay, so today's topic. So today we're talking a little bit more closely about private life in ancient Athens, and so a couple of points to talk about. The housing thing started to come up last week when we talked a little bit about the archaeological evidence for the seclusion of women. Today's Pomeroy talks more about what we know about the seclusion of women, although from Professor Pomeroy's standpoint on the subject. In general, what you need to bear in mind, of course, is that the housing situation is going to be different for practically everybody. And so there is a general sense that if there's a second story, the townhouse or villa is more likely to be divided into a women's quarters and areas in which that are more open to the public, which is to say places where men will bring over guests and so forth. The problem being, of course, that archaeologically the second stories are not available to us, and so we're working with part of the story. But this is primarily going to be talking about only part of the houses that we have available to us. Smaller houses are going to be very difficult to divide in this way, and every house at the largest end is going to be idiosyncratic, reflecting the needs and expectations of that particular family. What I want to say about clothing is we addressed this a little bit when we were talking about the chore, the female figurines that came up a couple of meetings ago. There are a couple of different sets of traditions for clothing that women wear in public, and so these would be either the Ionian dress or the Dorian dress. They generally tend to drape differently, but they are what they have in common is that they are sort of female counterparts to what the men are wearing, and they're not designed necessarily to be to obscure the female form or to necessarily highlight it. What we know about what women wear practically within the household during the day is relatively limited. We do have some depictions of this, but the sense is that that women within the household are still expected to conform to a certain standard and to wear clothing that is while practical still preserves their dignity. But that said, if there is a situation that calls for a different kind of dress, then that is the situation that you're looking at. For example, in a gymnasium, in a situation where women are pursuing athletic activities. So the interesting thing is that we know a good deal about the Spartan expectation of female physical fitness because the Spartans build this very firmly into their concept of eugenics. The understanding is that both the male and the female need to be physically fit in order for their children to be healthy and physically fit. And so this is part of the social expectations of women, that they be strong and well trained athletically. And as with a lot of aspects of Spartan society, what we see in Sparta in the extreme is present in the rest of the Greek world at a more subtle level. And so, there is a sense that we get that even in Athens, the general idea is that women are expected to treat themselves with respect as part of their responsibilities to their family and their children. The idea that a physically healthy woman is one of the ingredients to physically healthy children is present in Athens as well. And so even though we don't have the extreme premium on healthy children that we see in Sparta, we still see the social expectation that women take care of themselves, that they exercise, especially before and during their childbearing years. We know a good deal about the understanding of health and medicine with respect to women, because there are texts that deal with what we now call gynecology. And we'll talk more about this later because we have an article on it later on in the term. But there is medicine as it develops in the Greek world under Hippocrates and under Galen later is a application of philosophy and science to sort of the collective wisdom of the masses, the sort of folk tales that have come down from generation to generation, that during the development of medical science, its earliest forms in Greece, are tested and examined and systematized. And what we find, this will come up in the article that I mentioned, that comes up later in the course, is that there is a medical tradition, that reaches back amongst women as well as amongst men. In other words, there are folk tales and folk remedies that deal with health issues that pertain specifically to women. And so we have traditions that reach backward, that appertain to women as well as those that appertain to men and to people in general. And both of these strains of folk wisdom and folk remedies find their way into the origins of medicine as it's developed in ancient Greece and Rome. The Pomeroy discusses sexuality and prostitution there's more exploration to this in the articles for today. The interesting thing is that with sexuality, the way that a society deals with sexuality, we tend to psychoanalyze that sort of in retrospect. But fundamentally, sexuality is the means by which a society collectively preserves itself, and therefore is very much associated with the marital bond, and so we find out about social expectations of sexuality in terms of deviations from the norm. The two main deviations are A, adultery, and B, prostitution. So what a society says about adultery and gives us a great deal of insight. In particular, whether a society tends to think that adultery is the responsibility of the man, responsibility of the woman, or whether there's sort of a joint responsibility. This also extends, by the way, to rape. Attitudes toward rape are sort of an extreme form of this, and how the perpetrator and the victim are dealt with in terms of incidents of rape are also provide some insight. The problem with rape is rape tends to show up in the literature as a storytelling device in our mythology, Greek mythology and Roman mythology, and also in plays and poetry. It's one of these things where larger than life events are and crises are brought forward into the storyline in order to exaggerate the normal human response. And so our information about rape often tends to be, less reliable because it tends to be more dramatized. So this is something to bear in mind as you're reading about rape, especially if it's in a literary source. Something like adultery is a little bit more mild and can lead to more casual references that might provide a little more face value understanding of what we can understand of gender norms with regard to adultery. Likewise, prostitution. We've already encountered the idea that the prostitute is sort of the alternative path to the social norm for women. So the prostitute is someone who is not at the bottom of society the way we tend to think of it, but rather somebody who is beside society and has freedoms and abilities that a maiden or a matron tend not to have. And also is not able to enjoy the benefits of a secure social bond that the daughters, wives, and mothers have. So the prostitute is sort of on the outside in ways that can be that have a certain allure for those who are feeling bound by social convention, but also is also outside the benefits that come from home, family, and the involvement in the creation of the future of the society and the cultural, social, and economic transmission from one generation to the next. And so, the stigma associated with prostitutes in the ancient world, in ancient Greece, is not one of is not the one that we have, but rather one who is not part of the advancement and development, part of the story of the evolution and attainment of the ideal of the society to which wives and mothers and daughters and widows fully belong. All right, so the readings. So Pomeroy's private life in classical Athens. This is a great chapter. It provides a good deal of sort of anecdotal information about the private life in classical Greece. We have actually a little bit more information about this than we might have for other societies, But we have to bear in mind the limitations of our sources. And so, as you were thinking about this, as you were reading about, wives and mothers and prostitutes and the gymnasium this idea of seclusion and so forth, remember that most of our information has to do with the upper class, and so can be very far from pertinent to what it's like to be a peasant woman, living 20 miles from Athens. It comes from Athens, and so it gives us relatively little information about how this appertains to living in Thebes or Corinth, or what have you. It's primarily literary, and so that means that it's coming from sources that are telling a story, and so are fictionalized, dramatized, and not straightforward narrations of ordinary everyday life. So you must constantly bear this in mind when coming to conclusions about the story of private life, because even more for private life, the information that we have is only part of the story, and only partial for all that. The women at the Adonis festival, I've included this mainly because it's fun. It's giving us a sort of an unusual window into the gossip and boy ogling. How often do you see boy ogling in ancient literature in general, especially from women? And so this is primarily included so that you can hear some voices of ordinary women talking about ordinary things, even if it's at a festival, which is an unusual occurrence. They're speaking in a sort of off the cuff way. Of course, this is Theocritus is writing this. This is an idyll. This is a sort of his demonstration of a trope, his idea of what women are like. But nonetheless, it's a nice, refreshing alternative to our Sturm and Drang views of the situation of women. Speaking of which, the Bacchae, and so here we have. Here we have a very striking image of Pentheus, the ruler, the daughter, the son of Agae, being ripped apart by the Maenads, the followers of Dionysus. So this is a very striking story, and there are a number of things to try to figure out, what is it that Euripides is actually getting at in terms of this story? What can we talk about in terms of the depiction of gender in this story? And this is the thing, it's very easy to zero in on the frenzy. And how during the frenzy, Euripides is depicting women as being wild and mindless, but this is, you have to put this in context. So first of all, Dionysus is doing this. Why is Dionysus doing this? And why is Euripides presenting it in this way? What comes to mind is when we were talking about Gilgamesh at the beginning of the semester. The complaints of the people of Uruk, the thing that jumps out at us as we're reading it is, oh my God, Gilgamesh is sleeping with all the brides. He's violating all these women. But when the complaints are presented to the gods, the townspeople are presenting the ways in which Gilgamesh is abusing the women and is abusing the men, and they're presented side by side. What strikes me reading the Bacchae is that The men and the women are both transformed. The men and the women both become this this other, and at the end of the play, both the men and the women suffer. Cadmus and Agawe are both cursed, and of course Pentheus is dead, having been ripped apart through the machinations of Dionysus. Pentheus dies, because Dionysus tricks him, not because the women are frenzied. So this is the first thing, and so and during the frenzy, so women become these deranged hunters, and men become the hunted. And so first of all, so what is going on there? And second of all, what it is that Dionysus is trying to accomplish. So the whole idea behind Dionysus is, and at the end of the play, the chorus is saying, well, Dionysus was right. You dissed him. You turned your back on Dionysus, and so he was right to punish you. So what is it that what does it mean to turn your back on Dionysus? And for this, you can look back at Dionysus's first speech, where he talks about what it is that he's about normally. And what it is that he's about normally, is when he's talking about the places that he's visited, and he so first of all, shaded round the vine's clustering foliage, he's the protector of grapes and what grapes have to offer, wine, and the idea of what wine has to offer, which is the liberation of the mind. And here again we see, so this is the first city in Hellas that I have reached. There too I have ordained dances and established my rites, that I might manifest my godhead to men. Dances and joy. And so what it is that Dionysus is offering, what he represents is the liberation that comes from breaking free of rules and conventions in a temporary way. That comes from intoxication. Intoxication is a necessary element of a structured society. Otherwise, things become bound and fixated and stuck in the past. And so, to turn your back on this and to attempt to preserve, structure, order, civilization at all costs is to forsake, the progress that comes from expression that is not necessarily rational. This is the interesting thing. So the Greeks are deeply enamored of expression as a means of providing revelation of new ideas and new knowledge. And this can be approached in a rational and systematic way through philosophy and science. But there's also the understanding that, inspiration, epiphany, genius comes about in ways that involve, lateral thinking and irrational jumps of the mind. And this is where, the flashes of what is the humans are potentially capable of. This is what sets humans apart from all the other creatures. This is what sets Greeks apart from the barbarians. Is this capacity for insight that can be at its most profound when its circumstances and catalysts are irrational. And so the Greeks are looking for both, and And this is one of the things that Dionysus represents. And to turn your back on this is to invite the destructive form of irrationality, the destructive form of extreme joy. These things that are represented in the frenzy and the hunt. So these are some of my thoughts on this. I'm very much looking forward to hearing, your responses to the Bacchae. Talk about Pentheus, talk about Agawe, talk about Dionysus, and what it is that is going on in this story, and why Euripides is telling it. What this has to say about social bonds, about the social structure, and about gender. But don't just go looking for women. One of the look for the relationship between women and men. And in this case we have father and daughter, mother and son, sister and sister, and lots of permutations like that to think about. The menace of Dionysus goes further into discussing what is happening in the Bacchae in particular, and so one of the things that comes out in the Siegel article is he makes a statement. The city that Dionysus enters is falling short of its responsibilities. The city fails in one of its most basic functions, to realize the full human potential of its citizens. A Greek city, Apollos, is not just a place where people live. The whole point of the exercise is to progress, to push toward something greater, the individual and the collective. And so there's a much more in-depth discussion of in particular how the idea of the hunt is involved in the frenzy and the tearing to bits of poor Pentheus, who, as the chorus says, deserved what he got. And you have to have committed a pretty serious crime to have been torn to pieces by your own mother. Dover, classical Greek attitudes towards sexual behavior. By the way, what we're looking at here is a modern illustration. This is for a poster for a performance of Lysistrata. And we'll end up talking about Lysistrata a little bit later, in the next day or two. So, but attitudes towards sex. So this is, the Dover article is giving some examples of different situations. So this is, again, elaborating on some of the things that are brought up in terms of sexuality more briefly in the Pomeroy chapter. And, so as you might expect, it's more complex than we might assume, and varies across class and situation. But so the Greek response to sex is not one of suppression, but one in which there are very firm ideas about appropriateness that have to do with maintaining the standards of society. What is happening in archaic, especially classical Athens, is that Athens is changing so rapidly that so many of these things are coming into question. And so there's concern on the part of people that are paying attention to social mores, that things are getting undermined. And this is the story behind a lot of, especially the comedies, especially Aristophanes' comedies, like The Clouds, like Lysistrata, like The Congresswoman. And this concern about the erosion of social norms through this rapid transformation of Athens. This is actually one of the things, it even lies behind the Bacchae, the idea that a god can come to Thebes and the people are like, well, we don't really need him, because there's this growing sense. And Euripides himself is actually partly responsible for this. There's this growing sense that, well, men have to take responsibility for their own, society, for their own justice. We'll get into this more later, but early tragedy, Sophocles and Aeschylus, Sophocles especially, you see the concept of the Deus ex machina, the god shows up at the end and dispenses justice. And this carries over from Homer, the idea that gods respond to human misbehavior, human failings, and in particular, things that humans do that impact negatively on the community. So, pride, hubris, ambition, greed, all these things are most dangerous and are likely to result in divine retribution. When they are causing danger or disadvantage to a community. This is, the Trojan War is the ideal setting for this. Achilles stewing in his own pride, leads to, the death of many men on the battlefield, including his own protege Patroclus. So by the time we get to Euripides, by the time we get to the height of classical Athens in the mid-5th century, so much has been transforming that the Athenians have instituted a pure democracy where they're making their own decisions on their own behalf, and people are starting to get the sense that they don't. That it is for humans to take responsibility for their own justice and not wait for the gods. And they're not dependent on the gods for the understanding of nature, and they don't need the gods to reveal the physical world to them. Philosophy and science can do that through pure rational exploration. It's the ancient Greeks who developed the concept of the atom. On top of this, we have the debate over nomos versus physis, the debate over whether morality is decided by the collective opinion of a community, and can theoretically change at any time. Whenever a community changes its mind. So and is wholly situational, community by community. You can have, your community that you live in might decide that killing babies and putting them on spikes is perfectly acceptable, even though the city 50 miles down the road burns somebody at the stake for killing a baby and putting them on a spike. So that's the idea of nomos. That's the idea that morality is whatever people say that it is, agree that it is, if they can say that it's something else the next day, they can say that it's something else the next town over. The converse of this physis is the idea that that's ridiculous. That there are things that are true. There are things that are just. There are things that are pure in terms of light, in terms of their in terms of being a standard for the for justice in the world. This is the search for universal truth. The idea of universal truth, the idea these universal laws are part of the very existence of the world around us, of physis, of the universe. And that means that they're independent of the opinions of men and independent of the opinions of gods. And as the physis idea, the idea of universal truth takes hold and gains traction in the classical era, and ultimately leads to the teachings of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, there is there's a backlash to this, of course. That Socrates ends up being executed for corruption of the youth because he's teaching these things. But those who find this idea appealing, the idea of universal truth, what do we need gods for? Gods are irrelevant to what is true, what is just, what is right. So anyway, all of that is background for the Bacchae, and for the rapidly changing and rapidly anxiety-inducing changes of classical Athens. The women's ritual article, this is very interesting. So before we have the article on the cult of Demeter and Kore, this fleshes this out a little bit, because what this article is saying, this is very interesting, is that there are contributions that women make collectively through these kinds of festivals, rituals, and cults that are part of the way in which humans contribute to their community in general. And so women are doing this, men are doing this, and so they're doing it separately as genders, and they're doing it together as a community. And so the idea here is there's a little bit of a sense that the festivals and cults that are particularly associated with women are not merely about women finding community amongst themselves in the face of seclusion and isolation from the public life of Athens. This is actually a part of the organic way in which all of the members of the community are contributing to the health and support of that community. The way in which women are conducting these things are part of the way in which women contribute to society, and there are male counterparts to the same kind of behavior. And finally, we have two articles about food and wine. So the commensality article has to do with we start from the assumption that dinner parties and dancing parties are male only, and this is simply not true. And we can go further in this. So the Burton article goes into some detail about the circumstances in which you can understand and expect the participation of women. And actually, if you are attending a dinner party and a woman is present, this is going to mean, if the woman is a married woman as opposed to a hetaira, and we'll talk about more about hetaira later. But if this is a well-to-do, respectable woman, the presence of that woman is a demonstration of that respectability, because you wouldn't find someone who is not respectable in these circumstances. A wife or daughter with a bad reputation. But so there's once again a more complex understanding available to the ways in which women are involved in private gatherings in the home and elsewhere. The main thing to bear in mind is that if there is any concern about a woman being vulnerable to the actions of a man who is not part of the family, a woman would not be left alone with, a guest in the home, and this would be in order to prevent any circumstance of seduction or something even more untoward. And the implication being, primarily in the form of men not being trustworthy in those situations. But so the commensality situation is complex, and the women in their cups is also an interesting little article. So here we see this is actually one of the illustrations that's presented in the article. The large drinking vessel on the right here is a skyphos, is one of these large drinking vessels, and so this is something that's used in order to further a sort of stock stereotype of women as being as being pursuant of indulgence. The drinking of wine sort of stands in for and relates to the pursuit of wanton sexual encounters. Once again, this is an exaggerated stereotype that's used largely for effect, largely in comedy, and so is not something that's necessarily representative of the way in which women are understood to be. But anyway, this is an interesting article for the discussion of that subject. So that's it for today. Any questions that you have about approaching the structure or evidence for your paper, please talk to me by email or post a question in the questions forum, and I'll do my best to help you out. And I'll also have some suggestions in my responses to your proposals, which I will get back to you later in the week.